Hey guys, it's Mel. Welcome to my channel. So I had a few different ideas of videos that I could potentially do today, but I've settled on doing a September wrap-up. Maybe it's a little bit late for a September wrap-up, but that's what I wanted to do. So that's what I'm going to do. Before I get started talking about the books that I read in September, I just want to talk about ratings. I haven't quite figured out how I'm going to rate books yet. I've been watching a few different booktubers videos about how they rate books to get some idea of how I want to rate books. So there seems to be quite a range of difference in how people do give their star ratings. Some people seem to just give star ratings off their own opinions and feelings about the books. Some people have sort of a point system and they will allocate points depending on certain aspects of the book. I watched a video from Average Joe Reads the other day, and he actually has started rating each chapter of the book and then giving an overall rating once he's added that all up and then divided. I will link that video in the description below. I really like Merphy Napier's comments about when she has read a book that in general is a really good book and it's well written, but it's just not really her preferred style, or she's not the intended audience for a book, then she doesn't give it a star rating because she doesn't feel that that's a fair thing to do for the author. I really like that way of looking at it. I will link her video in the description below also. Thinking about giving points out of 5 for different aspects of the books. So character, plot, setting, theme, that sort of thing, and then sort of figuring that out to a star rating of out of 5. But again, I haven't quite figured that all out yet. Anyway, so this September wrap-up, I will not be giving any star ratings for any of the books that I read. I will just be telling you about them and some general thoughts that I had about them. So let's start. The first book that I read in September was The Wise Man's Fear by Patrick Rothfuss. I really enjoyed this book. I really like Patrick Rothfuss's style. It's been a while since I read the book, so I'm a little bit hazy on exactly what happens in the book, but I know that I did really enjoy this book. It's the second in the series, the first one being The Name of the Wind. So when the story opens in The Name of the Wind, the main character is living as an innkeeper and no one knows who he really is in the local town. One day a local scribe turns up at the inn and he figures out who the main character is. They strike a deal whereby the main character, whose name is Quoth, will tell chronicler, as he's known in the story, the story of his life. So the first book is the first few years of his life, and then this book is the next few years of his life. So there's two sort of parts to the story. There's in the inn when Quoth, or Coat as he's then known, is telling the story, and that dynamic between him and the chronicler and his servant Bast, and the local town and some things that are happening in the local town. And then there's Quoth's life story, which is the other part of the story, and you do flip backwards and forwards between the two, but the main action of the book is Quoth telling his life story. I actually like the way that we also switch from third person to first person in the writing style, and that works really well because the first person is Quoth telling his story, and then the third person is when we're back at the inn and it's setting up that overarching framework that the story sits in. I agree with Merphy Napier. I think that Patrick Rothfuss is very intentional in what he includes in the story. So I don't feel that anything that Quoth tells chronicler in that framework and in the story is unintentional. I think that every part of it has a purpose. Even if it's not particularly clear in the book as you're reading it, it later becomes clear as to what the purpose was. Like I said, it's been a while since I read this book, so I'm a little hazy on all of the details, but I just know that I really liked the book. I thought that it was really well written. I really liked the way that he characterizes Quoth and Quoth's journey and Quoth's growing up and all the things that he goes through. I like the fact that when Coat is telling the story, he doesn't try to twist anything to say, well, you know, it's okay that I did that thing because I was a young man. He acknowledges that he made some mistakes, but he gives you an explanation that actually does make sense. Quoth is a young man who has gone through a lot, and you hear about a lot of what he's gone through in the first book. It doesn't pull any punches. It's not excusing any of Quoth's bad choices, but it sets it up to explain some of those choices. And in a lot of situations, he really didn't have a choice. He's very poor, and it really does a great job of showing what that would be like, what actual, real, genuine, gut-wrenching hunger does to a person's sense of self and sense of the world, and the way that they cope with the world, and the decisions that they make, that they may be making them knowing full well that they're not great decisions, but they're not in a position to really have much of a choice. And if they're going to not just get what they want out of life, but live, then they have to make those decisions. And it really shows the position that it puts people in. I will say that there was one section in this book that I felt went on a little bit too long. I won't go into detail about what that was. As much as I enjoyed that little interlude in the story, I just felt that it was a little bit longer than it needed to be, and I didn't feel that it added as much to the overall story as it could have. Yeah, so that's really all I have to say about The Wise Man's Fear. I recommend Patrick Rothfuss. I recommend The Name of the Wind. I recommend The Wise Man's Fear. They're really well written, really interesting books. If you like fantasy, you will really like these books, and I'm really excited for the next one. My partner Rowan, this is actually his book. They're both his books, and he loves Patrick Rothfuss, and he's been waiting for years and years and years for the third one. So I'm really hoping that I don't have to experience that, because I know how annoying that can be. So come on, Patrick Rothfuss, write the next one, please. The next 6 books that I read in September, I read all of them on my e-reader, so I'll put photos just up here as I'm talking about them. I actually bought my first e-reader in September, so I was super excited about that, and that's part of the reason why I read all of the rest of the books that I read in September on the e-reader. The other part of the reason is that Rowan and I went on holidays to Japan for 10 days. And I bought the e-reader because I finally decided that, first of all, reading books on my phone didn't really work because it ran the battery down really quickly. And second of all, taking physical books just didn't really work, because then you had to take lots of books. And if you ran out of books, then you had to figure out what to do about that. Whereas obviously with the e-reader, you can download as you go. So the first book that I read on e-reader I actually read this after I got it, just about a week before we went away. And that was 3 Wishes by Leanne Moriarty. This is a book about 3 sisters, triplets, whose names I've completely forgotten. And it's about their separate stories and about a year and a half out of their lives, and a little bit of backstory about their mum and their dad, and just what happens in that section of their lives. It starts out with different people's recollections of a fight that the 3 girls had in a restaurant on their birthday. So each chapter has one person's recollection of that fight, and then it goes into the backstory of the fight. So each chapter is before the fight, and it's leading up to the fight and what was the cause of the fight. And then the last 2 or 3 chapters are what happens after the fight. So I really enjoyed this book. I thought that it was really well written. I thought that it was a really great character study of different people's lives and how they intersect, and the dynamics in a family. So there's quite a few different relationship dynamics in the book. So there's the 3 sisters and their relationship dynamic, and then there's their 2 of the sisters' partners and their relationship dynamics with their wives, and then their relationship dynamics within the family. And then there's some backstory. You're told some backstory of the 3rd sister who was engaged, whose partner died. And then there's the relationship dynamic between the mother and the 3 girls, and the girls' upbringing and what they've experienced, and the mother and the father and their relationship breakdown, how that affected the girls. So there's a lot of stuff going on in the book, but it doesn't feel really heavy with information. It doesn't feel like you're getting lost for what's happening. It's all woven together really, really well. And like I said, it's a really good study of the dynamics of family and relationships, and how different relationships work and different personalities work. And also there is an element of the nature versus nurture argument about how children are raised, because these three women are triplets. So they're the same age. They have had a similar life experience. They had the same upbringing. They had the same divorce happen in their lives. They have had a very similar upbringing, but they're very different personalities, and I found that really interesting. Yeah, so I really enjoyed the book. It's easy to read. Like I said, even though there's so much going on, it doesn't feel overwhelming. It's easy to read. It's well paced. The characters are well written and well realised. As I said in my top 5 video, which I will link below as well, I find Liane Moriarty writes all of the characters in all of her novels really well, from the minor characters to the main characters. I don't feel that there is any one character that is ignored or doesn't have a real sense of being an actual human character in and of themselves. So that was Three Wishes by Liane Moriarty. The next 3 books that I read were the Hunger Games trilogy. I just googled who wrote the Hunger Games trilogy because I had completely forgotten. Suzanne Collins. So I really enjoyed the Hunger Games trilogy. I'm sure that I don't need to go into much detail what they're about. Most people would have seen the films or read the books or both. So I thought they were pretty solid, enjoyable books. They weren't anything earth-shattering, but I really enjoyed them. I have seen the movies a number of times, but I had never read the books, so I really enjoyed reading the books. I almost always prefer books to movies, and this was no exception. I do really like the movies, but I thought there was a lot more in the books. I thought there was a lot more information about Katniss. There was a lot more information about Panem, and I thought that the storylines were a lot more fleshed out. Having read the books now and reflecting on some of the similarities and differences, I think the movies are pretty true to the books. Some of the things that they left out in the movies, I thought in the books really propelled the story forward in a better way, and some of the backstory about Katniss and Gale and Peter and that whole romantic relationship, love triangle, and what Katniss is thinking and why she makes some of the decisions that she makes in regards to her public affection for Peter versus her private affection for Gale, and the confusion that she feels around that is really quite well explored in the books, and obviously isn't particularly explored or not as well explored in the movies. So I really appreciated that, and I thought that that explained a lot more about Katniss's character, which I appreciated. Even though a lot of the first 2 books takes place in the arena and there's not as much of the political and the revolution uprisings as are in the last book, I still really enjoyed the first 2 books. Oftentimes in that sort of situation, I would find myself getting annoyed with how long they spent in the arena focusing so much on action, but in this instance, I actually enjoyed that. So yeah, that was the 3 Hunger Games books. So Hunger Games, Catching Fire, and The Mockingjay. The next book that I read, I downloaded on our last day in Japan and read whilst we were waiting at the airport for our flights, and then on our flights and in the layovers, and that is Eleanor Oliphant is Completely Fine. I loved this book. I just thought that it was brilliantly written. I thought that it was really well paced. I liked the way that the character was written. I liked the way that the backstory and the truth about what was happening in the book was revealed, and I just thought that it was just fantastic. I've thought about it off and on since I finished reading it. I haven't been able to stop thinking about it. For those of you that don't know, Eleanor Oliphant is written in the first person, and it starts out with Eleanor telling us about a guy that she has fallen in love with. And it's revealed throughout the first few chapters that this is an ordinary falling in love situation. She's seen someone and she's sort of stalking him a little bit, and she's trying to figure out a way to put herself in a position where she's going to meet him. She's imagining that when they meet, they'll have an amazing connection and he'll fall instantly in love with her and that they will just be the best two people in the world. It's really clear in those first few chapters that Eleanor has a very unique perspective on the world and on herself. She is obviously very isolated and she doesn't really have anyone in her life, but her perspective on that is quite different from an outsider's looking into what she's saying. But as a result of having formed this infatuation with this guy, she's trying to change her life so that she can sort of start to fit in a little bit in society. As a result, her perspectives on herself and on the society in which she lives starts to change. She starts to form a friendship with another guy in her office. And through that friendship, she starts to experience life in a way that she hadn't experienced before. And we start to peel back some of the layers of mystery surrounding Eleanor, and we start to uncover some information about her childhood that is actually incredibly traumatic and not only has altered her life, but has really altered her sense of self and her sense of the world and the way that she approaches the world. I think that a few trigger warnings for some of the content in this book are probably warranted. It deals with quite a lot of trauma and emotional abuse, but it's done in such a way that I didn't feel overwhelmed or upset about that. I just felt intrigued and interested to see how Eleanor would grow from that and what the new parts of her life would show her about her previous life and how she could build herself or rebuild herself from the changes in her life. I just thought it was a really great exploration of how trauma can change someone's life. Like I was saying about Patrick Rothfuss, how you just don't know how you will respond to trauma and how that will change your life and what kind of a person you will become. There's a lot of research that shows that early childhood trauma has a massive, massive effect on people's personality and the way that people grow up and see the world and their outlook on life. The research shows that it actually just alters your brain chemistry. So I thought that this book was really true to that. It actually really demonstrated that really well. And like I said, it was really well written and I just thought it was fantastic. I honestly didn't really know what to expect when I started reading it. I just heard that it was a good book, so I downloaded it. I was blown away. Even though I haven't decided how to rate my books, definitely that one gets 5 stars from me. The last book that I read in September was The Killing Season by Faye Kellerman. I have to say that I was actually really disappointed with this book. I have read one Faye Kellerman book before, which I did enjoy. There were elements of this book that I enjoyed, but overall I didn't love it. I'm not 100% sure what it was about the book that I didn't love, but it just didn't really mesh with me. I think a lot of that was down to the fact that it felt like it was longer than it needed to be. It actually felt like it had 3 or 4 endings. I felt like there were quite a few times it could have ended and it would have been a fine resolution, and then it kind of kept going. And I didn't really appreciate that. I didn't really enjoy that. So yeah, bit of a disappointment for me. Particularly, I think after having read Eleanor Oliphant and just absolutely loving that, it was then a bit of a disappointment to come to a book that I wasn't really enjoying as much. I did finish it though, because even though I wasn't loving it, it was still interesting enough that I wanted to know what would happen and how it would end. And even when I found myself feeling like it should have ended but didn't, I still wanted to see how it would eventually end. So those were the books that I read in the month of September. I am still planning on having a bit more of a think about my rating system. I'll probably make my October wrap up in a couple of weeks. So I'm planning by then to have made a decision about how I plan to rate the books. Anyway, until then, this is what I thought of the books I read in September. I really hope that you liked this video. If you did, please give me a thumbs up. If you'd like to see more videos, please consider subscribing to my channel. I will see you next time.